no way. How was I to know that I was worse off keeping you around? That's why I go away. Feeling how it ends is just the worst part. I was in the man, but there was still no way. How was I to know that I was worse off?
And welcome to Delicious Discussions, a show brought to you by ADPList and myself, Brandon Groce, that is dedicated to bringing senior level designers and creatives alike to our design community to talk about their design and career journey, challenges they face getting into the industry, how they got into the position they are today, while also sharing tips and advice to aspiring designers and how they can reverse engineer a similar path for themselves or how they can pave the best path for themselves. On top of that, at the end of each of our live sessions is an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask our guests the questions you've been itching to get the answers to and get their direct feedback. So with that said, without any further ado, let's jump into today's session and introduce you to today's fine guest. With that said, let's jump in.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm always pretty jealous about your, what is it called? Like the disk table, it feels like sitting like a space station. Super cool. Hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, well, first, like, thanks a lot for having me today. I think, like, Brandon, we we talk a little bit about like my background, which is probably slightly different. Well, actually, quite different from like a lot of my colleagues, my friends. But right now, I'm a expert slash design director, and the reason is because I think the company spent about like 5 6 years trying to figure out the titles, and we're still having different ones. But most likely, what we're doing is what we call like digital transformation. So like to helping those large Fortune 100 companies trying to think about like what are some of the transformations they need, and digital is definitely one of them, right?
Yeah.
And my focus for the past 3 4 years are actually to help with those big utility companies, or like oil and gas, chemistry and agriculture companies, trying to think about what are some of the things or through digital solution they can create to improve their efficiency, to improve their customer experience. Thinking about 90-year-old Grandma Pam who has no idea how to, pay her bill, and for some reason receive a high bill and say, well, oh my God, I want to pay, but you're not letting me. So I actually literally have, helped like for about 2 3 companies trying to create solutions for that specific case. So that's what we do. And also, we're helping these companies to create their digital and design team as well. Because as we know, all companies deserve to have a team of designers who can bring them the best solutions through a more user centric view. So I think that's one of the key offer we do, like capability building.
Definitely. So let's dive a little bit backwards. And by the way, chat, thank you so much for helping your boy out. I did not realize my entire spiel introing Lou was on mute. I am so sorry, Lou. That's why I had you intro yourself for a hot second. But they could hear you totally fine. So that's why, I can't steal people's thunder. The world is like Brandon just
mysterious stuff, right? Like so
exactly. They're like, just look at Brandon and his magnificence. That spaceship is doing its work. It's much better when he's silent. But tell us a little bit about where you started, and how you even got into that, and what made you make the jump. Let's dive into that.
Yeah, it's a long story, and sometimes
That's why we
folks are
have time.
saying like, yeah, folks are saying like, why are you even doing this? But
Yeah.
so I'm originally from China, and my hometown, which probably a lot of you guys probably have heard of, is called Chengdu, which is the hometown for pandas, both giant ones and the red panda. And as we know, right, like I think last week was International Red Panda Day, which made me very happy. But that's basically the background. And then the interesting part is I went to the States for college. And at that time, the first time when I was trying to apply for the school, I went to St. John's University, which is in Minnesota. I was trying to be a fashion designer at that time because
There's more.
I have been, yeah, I have been like practicing drawings, paintings for about like 10, 12, 13 years at that time.
Yeah.
So my instructor was like, why don't you become a fashion designer? Right? Think about all those cool guys. And at that time, John Galliano still like, he's still the okay one before he's saying something inappropriate, and also like a bunch of other groups. I was like, yeah, being a male fashion designer sounds great. So I literally put my major as liberal study focusing on fashion designer because there's no such major in the school, and I got rejected for the visa application because they're saying that that's not a thing. So I have to change my major into communications, which is probably the closest, based on what I'm thinking about doing. And then what's interesting is that actually that become my major, and my focus was actually in rhetoric, which is another weird major. And I was the only international student for that as well.
Holy cow. So rhetoric, that was your major.
Yep, pretty much.
That's insane. All right, please.
It's called like
continue.
Communication with rhetoric focus, right? So
yeah.
So what happened is like the professor saying like, well, Socrates is kind of like your alum. I was like, oh, cool. And then what we're trying to study was like how people are convinced or persuaded by messages in the society.
Yeah.
So we have to study like sports, advertisement, like a civil rights movement, right? Like female rights movement, like all those things. But the most interesting part is that as we learned how to recognize when there's a message is trying to persuade people. We learned the mechanism of how people are persuaded, but we never learned how to create a message that can actually persuade people. So, we're like those, I know how this works, but I can't make it work, which is a pretty awkward situation. Yeah, so after that, it was pretty much like close to the subprime crisis, right, during 2008, 2010 at that time. So it's very hard to find a job, especially for someone who's not majoring in accounting, computer science, or some of the more must need skills. And I was looking for jobs like for advertising agencies. So even though I think like I made to like a couple of final rounds, they're like, yeah, we can't really sponsor you. I was like, shoot, like, what should I do? And then I went back to China, start to find a job in sports marketing, which is actually quite interesting. That's the part that I shared with you, right? Like sports marketing. At that time, it was a really tiny company, but my boss, who's basically a brilliant Singaporean, who understands pretty much everything about international trading and such, is like, hey Lou, I'm gonna teach you all I know. And then so I worked for about like 2-3 years in that field, help like some big companies creating PowerPoints showing like why you need to sponsor like sports event and what are some of the benefits you can get, and also get a chance to meet like some of the what I call international sports organization officials.
Yeah.
And I learned one thing from that experience is that this business is about relationship building. And as someone who's making decks, I'm not gonna get anything from it. Like I'm so replaceable.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So then that kind of like make me wonder like where else should I go? Right. I was like, okay, I'm gonna switch to technology because that sounds like a pretty cool and rising industry. So
and can I ask just to cut in right there, because I think that's actually really I think there's something in there. I want to selfishly dive into it. When you realized, and by the way, chat, I know I didn't preface this earlier, and I'm glad I didn't because I didn't know I was on mute. If you guys have any questions for Lou, please put them in the chat. We will have a Q&A section towards the end. If you guys have some questions for him to specifically answer while we're, not to interrupt the beautiful narrative that we're kind of going and rolling through. We'll save those towards the end, but just for conversation wise, we'll keep to what we're doing for 30 minutes. But if you guys have questions you got for Lou, drop them in the chat so that I can peep them. So back to, this is how I had fish oil today. Back to, I can actually remember where I wanted to pause.
Nice.
To the point where you were like, this is a relationships game. Did you just tie this to that particular industry or what exactly you were doing? Or did you think about relationships in a bigger sense where you were like, relationships are everything? Did that sort of thing hit you like that? Or you were just like, I'm replaceable, I need to build relationships to maneuver? Like how did it come across your mind exactly?
So I think it's probably the former, which is like for the specific industry, and probably can extend a little bit to marketing, right? Because during that time, I realized that when I'm creating contents, I'm creating ideas, I'm creating, my title was like creative lead at that time, right? Like I was trying to designing some campaigns and offerings, but then I realized it's not really the offering that is actually helping us to get the client. Is something behind the offering that probably my boss knows, and then so he can offer to the client. So for example, when we're doing like a project at that time, we're creating a bunch of things like, you can get like some benefits, we can do like some marketing campaigns online through a local newspaper. I think that was in Asia or somewhere, for like a championship game. And the client was like, yeah, sure, cool. And I felt like, oh, my deck did a great job. And then after we closed the project, my boss told me like, it's not really because what we offered from like a design perspective. It's also because like he used his network in the local area with like those merchant organizations to help them close a couple of deals. And that's how we got the job. And same thing just keep happening. And I was like, so what am I even doing, right? Like, I feel I'm just creating like some eye candies or sideshows that is kind of like making this a legit conversation, but the core of what we're doing is not really on what I'm doing.
The design work, right?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I'm not at the center of the business, which, you know, at some point I feel like at my age, this is probably not the best path I should follow.
Got it. All right, word. All right, so back on track. So from that, all right, you realized relationships. Where do we trail off into after that? You start moving into tech and.
Yeah, so that was the time so I was in Beijing at that time, and then I was like, where else should I go, right? Like, should I just go to a tech company? Luckily, I had a really close friend. She's a headhunter, well, like a recruiter, right? At that time, so I got a lot of her advice, and she's like, so if you go to a tech company right now, you probably need to start with as like a product analyst or something, which probably you have to cut your income half for at least for the first 2 years, or you can actually go to a graduate school to do like some sort of like, because I wasn't even thinking about design. I was thinking about like product management or something. Like, I didn't know UI UX design at that time, to be honest with you. So she's like, you can go to graduate school and probably they will give you a better chance to either go to a better track, right? Like some rotational program, or, you know, because you have that background, it's much easier for you to get into the gate.
Right.
So I was like, I don't know any schools teaching this in China, so probably I would just go back to the States. So I was trying to apply for school, and for some reason, probably I was a little older at that time, so my standard was like cheap and fast. So I found like the fastest and or shortest and cheapest program. Well, hope my professor is not listening, but you know, like so I went to Carnegie Mellon. They have like they have like a really fast program at that time.
Yeah.
It was like 9 months, and it's actually reasonable price, right? Because I also like got offer from some New York schools, and those are like crazily expensive, especially thinking about the living cost outside of tuition. So I was like, okay, you know, Carnegie Mellon it is, right? So I borrowed some money from my family, and I used all my savings. So I'm just gonna go there, nine months in and out, you know, very fast. Nice. So I went to Carnegie Mellon, and I realized, wait, so what should I do next? And I met like some of the program friends, right, who went to the same program, and they're saying like, oh, I want to be a UI UX designer. I was like, what is that? So they taught me what is UI UX. You know, like, oh, and I was like, oh, I can be a designer as well. That's fun. So it only 9 months, and I didn't even have like a portfolio or anything. So I was like, I'm pretty late in the game. Yeah, but what's interesting is that, so probably because of my working experience, I start to come up with strategies, right? Like, if I don't have portfolios, what should I do? So I start to participate in all different type of competitions. And you know, like in Carnegie Mellon or University of Pittsburgh, like that community, there's a lot of hackathons, you know, competitions, impactathons, like those. Basically, those competitions or events that can help you to quickly create a project, and you can, you know, put them up and make as one of the entries, you know, item on your portfolio.
So how did you? I have to pause you here too, because there's so many people, once they get the education, they sit and they wait. What made you say, hey, I can't sit and wait, I need to fill my portfolio, and I'm going to do this through competitions? And I'm only assuming this because you had friends kind of telling you, hey, I'm kind of doing this. You guys shared information, and that kind of drifted you towards the UI UX, and you realized that was a thing. Did your friends kind of push you this way too, or did you literally just like you had a brain fart one day and you were like, aha, design hackathons? What was it exactly?
So I think it's actually twofold, right? Like the first is because I have experience when I graduated from undergrad. During that time, which is really hard to find jobs, I fiercely like looked for jobs for about like half a year. Well, so I actually graduated like one semester early, so I only took my college for about like 3.5 years. So for the rest of the 6 months, I literally just keep finding jobs. I think I applied for at least like 500 different jobs or something, and only got like probably 10 interviews. So that was like almost feel like a human nature for me to trying to find jobs. Like I have like this motivation. And also I think from a UI UX perspective, it's just like one option, right? Because I was like keep looking for a product manager, UI UX, product marketing manager. I think I have applied all of them. The thing is that when I just got in like that fall semester, we actually had a career fair for tech companies, but for techie roles, so including product managers. That was like a little early, so I started the program around August, and then that one get hosted around like October. So I learned about the fact that my resume and portfolio are not going to help me to get a product manager job, just because during that time most of the company is asking you to have a computer science background, which I don't really have. And I got a couple on-site interviews for some reason. I didn't even understand why they picked me, and they also gave me a lot of they also gave me a lot of feedback by saying like, hey, yeah, you're probably not the right candidate. We didn't know why you passed. I was like, yep, well, thanks a lot for your feedback. I'm gonna adjust my direction. So I think that was like the epiphany moment for me to change my direction to UI UX designer, because that's probably the most achievable goal I can get, starting from November that year, because I'm graduating in 5 months.
Man, that's insane. That and by the way, guys, I'm seeing like some very strange feedback in my my. Do you see me slowing down, Lou?
A little bit.
A little bit? I have no idea why that's happening. I apologize. Guys, new computer, new setup. Have no idea why this is happening. Hence the audio and whatever. All right, so bring us past this. You kind of just brought us to a wall. You were like, okay, I got through this sort of interview process, and you don't realize why or how you got through, and also you got slapped down. So where exactly did we go from there?
So I started to create my portfolio, right? Like I was like, okay, now I know I'm gonna be a designer. But what's interesting is that obviously it's really hard to compete against a bunch of folks who probably studied design for 4 or 5 years. In the past. So I started to join, participate in different competitions. And I still have this record. Like whatever competition I participate, I always win something. Like it's either like the 3rd place or sometimes the 1st place. And most of the time, the reason why we won is because I'm the one who's creating a business case for it. Versus like, for most of the other entries, like for the teams, they never thought about business side of things. They only just create designs, solutions. So that kind of helped me won, probably 2-3 competitions. And then I can put them on my portfolio saying like, you know what, it's not only like creating something, but also I'm winning, right? Like trying to entitle myself a little bit. So I think that's also the time I grabbed the opportunity to join McKinsey, which is actually hiring the digital teams, right? Like they're looking for digital design interns. What's interesting is that none of my friends actually know what McKinsey is, or what McKinsey was at that time. Right. So even I got the internship, they're like, "Oh, you went to a law firm. What do you do there?" I was like, "It's not a law firm. It's like
It does sound like a law firm, to be fair. That's what I thought it was before I actually like looked it up. But it's a fairly large consulting.
Yeah. So because of my business background, I recognized the company. I was, oh, that's like the world's best consulting company,
Yeah.
So I got the offer, and I got the offer from another design firm. So I was talking to my professor, who's like the program director. So I was like, I have this intern offer from McKinsey, and I have a junior designer job offer from a design agency. Which one should I choose? And that guy is like, McKinsey, of course. I was like, but that's like an intern and it's design. McKinsey is not known for design. He's like, who give a crap? Like it's a big name.
They have money. They have a big name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take it. So then I joined. So I was actually one of the first like design interns they hired for the design team. Like I had like two friends who get hired like early as interns, but that was the time that they didn't even have a design team. They get hired as designer for a tech team. So
Yeah.
I learned that right before I joined, probably 6 months, 7 months ago, McKinsey officially started like the organic design team internally, and then a couple of really senior design leaders joined, and I was like the first intern they actually hired. Yeah, so that was like quite an interesting experience, especially for my first 2 years, right? It's like I'm kind of almost feel I'm growing with the team, as the team was not even super clear on like what exactly is the path for design, especially when we're thinking about management consulting and design. By nature, are very different when you're thinking about the problem solving. I will say like structure, right? Like design is where we're trying to
think. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you're trying to.
No, I think like you're right. Like you have to think like exploratorily and then trying to converge for design versus for consulting. A lot of time, folks are trying to be hypothetical and trying to come up with day one answer as soon as possible, right? So yeah, so that was a challenge at that time.
Yeah, I think it's you almost have to think like an inventor, where you have to come in with what is the actual. I don't really think that they teach you, because we both of us, we have like an artistic sort of background, right? We started off drawing. I wanted to be a tattoo artist. Things didn't really work out that way, and then we realize we start going into our craft first. And then we realize that is a medium in which problems are solved, rather than how to think about solving problems and then picking the medium to produce the outcome.
Yep.
Is that kind of
exactly? Yeah. So I feel like that's the interesting part for me to witness and to learn, is that I think the team in general. Probably for the first 2 or 3 years, the team is trying to understand what exactly is positioning for design talent in the firm, right? Because I think we did a lot of projects mostly focusing on come up with vision, and then if this vision has been supported by research or have been supported by some of the insights we learned, but how to implement the vision, like we really get involved in that. It's almost feel like we're kind of part of the strategy, and we're actually the part that are not super solid, because it's kind of like this is the cool thing you can imagine probably for the next 5 years. Versus like then we start realize, you know what? The first thing to think about design is to understand where probably the design start to make sense. And then for me, I think because I actually played a lot of different roles like across like these years, right? So I started to realize that when we're thinking about design, what we're talking about is product and service design. But also, if you trying to go up a couple of levels, you can think about program design. You can think about strategy design. You can even think about, probably founding fathers design in the United States, right? Like that's a sort of design as well. So when we're talking about strategy, it's really just like where to spend money and what's the outcome we want. So should we be creative? Maybe, but also like when we're thinking about the general strategies, that's probably not the best time to be creative. right? Because we want to learn from the pattern. And then
Exactly.
once the team understood like where to spend money and which direction probably want to go, now it's the best time for design to jump in as like, since we decide which direction we're going, let's think about what's the best way to reach there. And then we can do research, we can be more user-centric, we can understand what's the vision look like, and then pave the road back to the current state by saying what are some of the key things we can do to reach the vision. I feel like that's where design can best serve like most of the cases, right? So
Yeah.
with that understanding, I think it really helped us to be much more mature and much more successful.
Hey man, so where do you think, I want you to point out for us kind of where the big nuggets of your evolving, because essentially you've just brought to us essentially to a conclusion where it was just like, I realized through all this experience and skill stacking, I realized relationships are highly important. The main thing isn't the design. It's more so how you are producing the strategy for a particular outcome. Is that kind of where you are today in terms of your understanding of what your value is and what other people who want to be in your shoes should be striving to also, how people should also be thinking in order to produce high value? Is that like your period on what people should learn to do, or is there like what are the things that you're now learning to be the next version of yourself? Like, is that where you are today and you're now learning a couple new things, or where are you, or where are we?
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting topic, right? When I'm thinking about this, I'm actually thinking about that there's always like hard skills and soft skills, and also there's always like a mindset versus craftsmanship. I feel like at this moment for me, craftsmanship starts to become something that I appreciate, but I'm probably not going to spend too much time on, because the more and also probably relevant to the type of industry I'm serving, right, which are more traditional. So if you think about what's most important there, I think there are a couple of things. The mindset shift is more important than what design you're actually creating, because regardless like how much time you spend on the craftsmanship or design, if you're not really changing people's behavior and nudging them to embrace some of the changes, the design probably not going to make too much sense for them, as they're saying, oh cool, it's just like cool drawings, cool graphics, cool technology, but for them they'll feel like, oh, but those are meant to be used by Google or Facebook, not us,
Right.
versus like what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to build the mindset, trying to build the trust and also confidence for the more legacy organizations, saying that you can do that too, and it's actually not that hard as you thought. When you're thinking about user-centric, it's not like you have to completely change your organization charter to be more user-centric, or to be more design-friendly, or even just like to be on par comparing to some of the other digital experience. And also, I think one of the things we want to help people understand is that there is starting to have a digital divide between whatever people are using for part of their life and when people are engaging with either your company or your employees is using some of the working software. And that digital divide drives frustration, right? I think in the past, many of the leaders for these organizations feel like, you know what, job is job, right? We're just going to use whatever tools we have. And then it's the employee's responsibility to just rough it through. Versus like, we want to help the team understand that there's a chance for you to improve your employees' experience and also improve efficiency and eventually get you value. And then that worth investment, right? That's digital transformation. And if you think about this whole spiel, or like this whole process we talk about, the most important thing is, how can we have a very solid logic and accompanied with the trustworthy relationship building that we can have with our client partners.
Got it. So, can you speak a little bit more? Because you kind of lost me, man. with the divide exactly. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by? Because when you said that, my mind went into. Actually, I have incomplete thoughts about it. So can you reverse a little bit for us and dive back into like explain what exactly the divide is that you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, just think about this, right? Think about like a mechanic from, let's say, a utility company, or like someone who's like a driller for a oil company.
Yeah.
Or like someone who working some of this heavy industry companies. Probably during the night, they search on Google, trying to shop on Amazon, check on Instagram, use Uber to get a ride, and then during the day, they're using super hard to use industry software that almost feel like Windows 95 and have like a million forms they have to click. And also there's a lot of like paperwork and digital documents they have to keep track of, right? It's very frustrating. Right. The same thing as for customers, right? Like I can order something quickly on Amazon. I can make a payment easily through like Venmo. I can probably get like installment quickly from a firm. And now when I'm trying to pay my electricity bill and I'm asking for a payment arrangement, they're having me to fax like a form I have to fill in by hand so I can set it up. That's the digital divide I'm talking about. That you almost feel like because of this difference, you feel like you're living in two different worlds.
Got it. That makes sense. So kind of going back to the big lessons that you've kind of learned. Like, I feel like, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to ask this question because I'm like, how am I going to ask what are you currently learning versus like, what are you looking forward to learn in the future? Because I feel like with the big nugget that is, just, it's not necessarily about design. I feel like that's where I kind of get caught up with like school, boot camps and stuff are cool. But, maybe we just open up a whole new line of conversation. What are your thoughts on education? And what those who are getting in the space now, do you think that they should take the same approach as you did? Do you advise typically there's a better and faster and cheaper approach than what you did? Like, what are your thoughts in that space? Because obviously, just thinking about how you got literally into the ground floor at McKinsey as a intern, and you were able to essentially grow with that internally. How can people put themselves in the same position, and would you prescribe them your route, sort of traditional education? And obviously there's other things tacked onto that. Like, what would you do today?
So, I mean, this is like pure personal opinion, right? So,
yeah,
I'm not gonna say like whatever I said is true.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. Exactly. Yeah, I have to probably write it down on the screen. But anyway, so my gut feeling is that there's two pieces, right? The first one is for design. There's always like two elements we have to think about. The first one is the mindset, like what's your thinking structure, and what's your framework basically to. I'm going to quote my professor. What's your framework to be able to repeatedly innovate at a high quality? Right? That's the key difference between a designer versus an artist, right? Artists, like, I probably need to think, I need to be inspired, versus like designers, there's a deadline, there's a budget, you have to do what you have to do. Right? So you have to have a framework that is solid enough. And then also like you need to have craftsmanship to deliver. Because compared to when we're talking about like traditional business or management consulting, which you can probably produce an idea or concept, for design, you also need to make things more tangible. right? Make
Right.
to visualize stuff to actually create something that can be built. So those are two, I feel like, very important pieces. And of course, like uh, along the way of your professional growth, the focus will shift. Maybe like when you're more junior, the hands-on delivering piece will be more important.
Mm-hmm.
While like when you're getting more senior, it start to oversee like the full scale of the product, then the framework is probably more important because you want to make sure that's the right answer. The suggestion I have is that I do feel like if you're going directly into a boot camp without any design background, because I know like you can have some folks who used to be architect, who
Yeah.
used to be, like industrial designer going to boot camp, and they probably did great because they already have like some sort of mindset of problem solving and thinking about like a framework. So learning the craftsmanship, learning the ability to deliver specific type of deliverables like screens or prototypes will definitely help them to quickly switch their direction. But if you don't really have like a background in design, like for example, I know someone who used to be sales or used to being, I don't know, like insurance risk management. That's a very different mindset you have compared to a designer. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe the best way to do it is to go to a more traditional, let's say, college or postgraduate education, because that will help you to build that framework so that you can use them properly instead of like following a template that bootcamp taught you, which is not wrong, but it's just not
Yeah.
very flexible and probably going to get you wrong answer.
Yeah. I think because through your background, you have a very rich experience in a lot of things where it was like where you started was not at all where you ended up, but the different perspectives that you were able to gain from those different experiences were able to help you think outside of the box and differently when it came to business problems, or just business in general. It's out of the box thinking, how can I approach this particular problem and with this particular outcome that we're trying to achieve, where exactly I'm literally just repeating what you're saying, but I think you put it really well, that some of the frameworks that are taught specifically for the industry we're in are too strict for how flexible our thinking needs to be, for good problem solving. We need to think outside of the box to come up with the best solutions versus, hey, here is a 5-step process to come up with the best solutions. Because that's just like beginning. That's like the 1, 2, 3 steps of beginning, like how to freaking think, versus being flexible. Like I kind of say this with whiteboard challenges too. Like some people are like, well, how do you do the whiteboard challenges? I'm like, it's literally an exercise in how to think, and
Exactly.
that's it. You can't train for it. You just need to be able to know how to ask the correct questions. If they are allowing you to do so, there's certain constraints. You just need to know how to think, and that's the biggest thing.
Hmm. Yep.
Um,
Like how to think structurally, right? Like how to,
exactly.
yeah, like I was like sharing with my friends. So I'm like doing some volunteer mentoring, right? Like with ADPList. That's how we
Right.
met. So I was like tell people that when you're thinking about whiteboard challenge, it's really just mimicking how you should work within a product team, right? Like you can't just say like I designed this because I like it. I like it this way, right? Like you
Yeah.
have to come up with like a logic that can back it up. Like I interviewed someone who's like, I was like, why do you choose this feature? And then she's like, because I think it's cool. I was like, I mean, I didn't
That's
say it in her,
nice.
but I was like, my mind, I was like, that's like the most wrong answer you can probably ever, give like in a whiteboard challenge. Is that I feel like
Right.
that way. Yeah, unless it's a whiteboard challenge for a creative agency, which probably that might work.
For sure. And guys, I'm sorry I don't know what is going on my end. Like my internet is lagging. Like Lou's photo totally looks like a burnt toaster strudel.
Yeah. It's
but
like
guys,
a Call of
just listen
Cthulhu type, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm having some serious. I ordered a new laptop, and this is the first time I'm running it, and I'm having some serious issues that really should not be happening. So I appreciate not only your patience, Lou, because this definitely shouldn't be happening to any guest, and for you guys' patience in the chat. But however, on that note, we do have some questions in the chat. Let us start with that. Let me see. All right, there we go. We're back. Fixed it.
Nice.
Jesus. You're too good looking not to have you on screen, man. All right. So we have a question in the chat. DK Jux. Question: what is the best thing you could do to help position yourself as an experienced freelancer that has worked 9 to 5 for 10 years to avoid being taken advantage of? Any thoughts there?
To avoid being taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think to put that in, I'm putting words in the mouth at this point, but I feel like one of the biggest struggles as being an employee versus freelance is kind of what you're talking about, like I forget the term that you used earlier. I think it was before we went live, no, actually it was being essentially you doing those presentations, right? Mm-hmm. And literally that's all you're doing. Things change when you go freelance, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And let's say you've just done, you've been an employee your entire life. You don't necessarily have, I guess the frameworks we'll call it, to understand that what you are now charging for is not just time. You have all these other expenses to deal with, and on top of that, you're not just taking orders. You're explaining what is the exact value somebody is going to get out of what you're going to produce for them, and it's not just a $1 equals 1 minute or however your thing is. And yeah, so anyway, do you have any? Yeah, I think it's a mindset thing, but go ahead.
I agree. I feel like based on my experience is that freelancers are when we're talking about the focus, right? We're talking about the framework and the craftsmanship. I think for most of the freelancing roles, if you think about how a company is going to treat them, they're probably going to more focus on the craftsmanship side as like someone who can come in and do a great job, and also we can, probably remove that person if we don't need that piece of resource. It'll almost feel like a surge capacity type of stuff, versus like full-time, you probably have more, I will say, that opportunity to get into the core logic and why we're even doing this type of conversation with the team. But on the other hand, that means like you're also probably struggling from convincing people, talking with their language, trying to translate the value of design, trying to be the advocate. So I guess like my point is like, if you want a free life, want a simple life, and also you love craftsmanship, freelance is definitely the better option. But if you actually want to be, I would say, vertically grow a little bit more, right? By saying that I want to, not vertically, horizontally, trying to cover a little bit more areas beyond design, then probably in-house is better. And then when we're talking about take advantage or something, I will definitely say that that's about like setting boundaries and expectations, right? I don't know if that is even just for freelancing or for full time. I think it's everywhere. Like if you don't want to get taken advantage of, the most important thing is trying to set the boundary, trying to set expectation, and also just trying to be assertive. Yeah. Like we're talking about like the sense of numbness, right? Like don't feel embarrassed because there's nothing to be embarrassed about.
Agreed, man. And hopefully, all right, DK says thank you very much. So that floats their boat. Nice. All right. We have 2 other questions. We have Miss Fergie. Hi, Fergie. How you doing? You are at liberty or not to answer this, but let's just say in an alternate universe. Okay. If you could have any other job, because he is quite happy at McKinsey, if you could have any other role or project, what would you dream of?
So I do have dreams. Like, well, I mean, everyone has.
Of course,
dreams,
yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, like, I mean, I was thinking about like trying to quit my job and become a chef. Like that's probably one of my biggest dreams. But
I want to know what goes on in your head, man, because like you're like you put it in here and it comes out. Like you were like rhetoric to sports to like design director, and then you're just like fuck it, I'm about to cook some carrots. Like,
well, but think about chef is like they're the ultimate like user experience designer, right? Like they're literally designing a experience and they're selling this experience to people. So,
very true.
Right? Like it's very connected. But I guess that's probably not the point of the question though, because
I think that you hit it though.
Okay.
Yeah, and can you kind of like lavish that up for us? Like what exactly? Because obviously there's an infatuation with food there. Like where did that thought come about? What portions of being a chef or parts of being a chef are like highly, just like I call it making you drool, but like make you starry eyed. Like what part of being a chef amazes you? If you can kind of like verbalize that for us.
I mean, so I think I'm a pretty good home cook already.
Yeah.
And because of my family, I actually have to start cooking when I was 6 because both my parents like worked pretty late. So I literally cooked my first pancake by myself when I was 6. So I can barely even hold like the pan.
Was it Bisquick though? Because that doesn't count.
No, I think it's much more complex than that. Like I have to start with flour. Like
I've never done that in my life. Yes, you're there.
Yeah, so I feel like that's the part that kind of like, helped me to build this passion with like cooking. And then I started to realize, cooking actually, it's really interesting because it's kind of like magic in a way that is very flexible. But also, it's kind of science because, if you think about like molecular gastronomy and all of those directions, there's so many different ways for you to make a great experience with high-end food or with cheap food. Like, it's really about the story you want to tell, right? Like, this is my mom's recipe. You force your girlfriend to eat something that she's like, sure. Versus like you take someone to like a high-end restaurant that's like a total different type of experience. So I'm really into like designing experience and see people benefit or enjoying it. So I guess that's probably the deep motivation I have in me.
I love that, man, and I love how you compared that to. I think this is why I really like your brain, because you're taking a very core thing. It's not like, oh, I'm in love with the pencil or the paintbrush or the. It's like an artist thing. I feel like because I feel very connected to what you're talking about. People will be like, "How did the hell did you go from design to chef to, creative marketing?" People, on the surface, none of it seems connected, but at the core, it's an artistry, where it's like you like the process of the thinking that is required in anything essentially. If you have to figure out the user experiences and everything, being able to there is a need, there's a the way that I need to create something in order to appease somebody or create an experience for somebody, that is something of major interest. And whatever form that takes, that changes over time. Like, same thing for me, where I'm like, UI UX is cool, creating, websites is awesome. But now, you have this stuff with like, not just talking about Facebook, but this next version of the metaverse, man, that stuff has me. I'm reading about cryptocurrency and like what's happening in just like the metaverse. Like I literally have an avatar that's almost done. It'll be done at the end of November. But it's such a crazy time, and I just love because people are like, what do you mean? You're in UI UX. How are you going into this? And it's just like, it's not about that, son. It's not about
right.
Yeah, so I love that. And I guess last question I have another question. I'm gonna say it's my question will be the last. By the way, just tell me, because we are at 3. Just let me know if you have to Go grab your cat, or you have to go.
Nah,
You
I'm good.
All right, sweet. Last question again from Fergie. Any tips on how to sell design strategy in a way that businesses will better understand?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty good at that. So I can
Hey.
share. I think it's really about understanding, like when we're talking about design, like how to describe design in a way that business leader can understand. Because so I learned this from my mentor that if you think about a CEO or a CFO or whoever,
Yeah.
like those CXOs, they only care about two things, right? The first one is the ROI of the company. The second one is if my people are getting along with each other, right? So, like that's probably the two things they're thinking about: the resource and the goal. So when we're trying to sell design or design strategy in general, I think it's more about like what is the value there. And then of course, a lot of people are saying, well, I mean, it's so hard to quantify design, but on the other hand, there must be a way to connect design with what we call value drivers,
Mm.
right? I can give an example. So this is like a project I've done so many years ago. I think when I was like a junior designer. So
Yeah.
we're helping a company upgrading their like a sales funnel, right? So they're
Yeah.
saying like, well, I mean, we need to upgrade this, but through a design perspective, but how and why? So what I did is like, and probably many of the folks now knows how to do it much better than me. Like you do like an inspection, you understand what are some of the interactions happen throughout the funnel, and then for each of them, you're saying that I'm making assumption that by encountering this type of challenge, probably 50% of people are going to drop. And of course, we have like some data from like ClickFox or some of the dropout monitoring software to back it up. But
Yeah.
by doing that, you basically give people a very clear view on that these design flaws are costing you probably 20% of people just dropping from the funnel, right? And then if you think about best practices, which nobody knows if this is going to work or not, but if you think about best practices in the market, like Amazon, like Verizon, or like some of the other teams, they're doing something well to make them become the leader.
Yeah.
And then also with like some design, I would say guidelines, you're saying that, okay, so if you change this design flaws into something better, we can be pretty confident that you can improve this conversion rate. To how much? Well, I mean, I can give you a number. I probably, if you think about the gap between you and Amazon is like 50%. Maybe if you do all of these things, it's probably not going to go as crazy as 50%, but maybe we can meet half. Right? So it's a lot of hypothesis and there's a lot of number, but we have to bundle them in a reasonable way so that you can basically confidently tell people if we do certain design decisions, it will help you to meet this goal. And I know like a lot of time tech folks are uncomfortable saying that, but that might not be true. But think about probably 90% of the business strategy before they get implemented, they're not true as well. So it's the same thing, right?
Damn,
like
that was a bar right there. Hold on.
Yeah.
That was like, I knew that, but you putting all that together was just like, yeah, pretty much everything is a hypothesis.
Yep.
And you're essentially also, because I get into, or at least when it comes to, my things as well, I have to sell potential metrics in terms of, okay, we're going to give you this much money to create content, and this is how many people we're hoping to reach. Well, how do you know exactly we're going to reach that? And you have to figure out a way to, through, in the past, I've had to use my past campaigns to sell on what we are here today. And kind of where I've been struggling is when we're trying to take the number a little bit higher. I obviously can do that through a paid means or SEO, things of that nature. But I've always felt uncomfortable doing that. And where you can make it happen, just like the things that we're planning internally or anybody's planning internally at a company, you guys are planning to do it. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but you guys are trajectorizing to do that.
Exactly.
So that was, I think the way that you explained it made it more comfortable to hear, I guess.
Yeah, and also, I mean, think about this, right? Like, it's really just about if the story makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, because, for example, if I'm doing like a marketing campaign with you by saying like, okay, so I'm gonna set up a billboard. Based on our observation, there's on average like 30,000 people walking past by. So, and then based on some, a rule of thumb that probably 20% of people are probably gonna notice it. So this is the number.
Yeah.
How do you know 20% of people are gonna notice
Right.
it? This is just like a freaking rule. Like, probably like some sort of pattern recognized. We can use the same thing for design, right? Like, most of the time people recognize the button at the upper right corner instead of if you bear it like below the fold. So we guarantee like, well, not guarantee, like we think it's probably going to increase 50%. It's the same logic. It's just like people kind of used to like, oh yeah, because this marketing rule has been used like for 100 years versus like this design thing is only exist for like 5 years, so they're not sure, right?
Yeah.
But like deep it's the same thing.
So, all right, you gotta break this down because the thing with the billboards, I'm just like, that shit confuses me so hard. Like, for example, I keep seeing people renting out space on their cars as advertising space. And I'm like, kind of same thing for UFC. There is sponsorship. It makes a little bit more sense to me. Like, if you are going to sponsor an athlete, that athlete has a certain amount of eyeballs on them. However, I'm only able to quantify maybe some of the social media stuff. Maybe there's tracked links or whatever. But I'm like, they paid to be on my man or my girl's shorts during the fight. And the only where my mind goes is like, well, the UFC or whatever probably has an audience base of X. Their attendance is probably Y. And like, where do you get that percentage? Whatchamacallit? And I think we were talking about this last time. You were like, it's more so about the opportunity versus the conversion on. Yeah, I'm not gonna stuff words in your mouth, but can you kind of explain? Because we were talking about that, I still didn't understand. But can you? I guess that's my second to last question.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I understand correctly, you're saying that when we're thinking about impressions, right? Like,
Right.
or exposures,
Or
how do
supposed.
you,
Yeah.
how do you quantify or how do you know what exactly is the value?
Right.
And the answer is like, you don't. Like, well, I mean, maybe like from some measurement, like for example, like Nielsen Group, like they track like advertising, how many people watched it, but also you don't know like if they paid attention or not, right? So.
Right.
I guess it's still like you can only use limited data to support if that has value or not, right? Like, if I remember correctly, like probably every person will receive like 2,000 pieces of advertisement throughout the day, and this is the data probably 10 years ago. So now it's probably going to be even worse. You're not going to remember everything, right? So, okay, this is actually going to be pretty deep, so I'm going to simplify it. So there's like this theory called like elaboration likelihood theory, which basically means that when you're trying to make decisions, it can go either called central route, which means that you're logically trying to make a decision. For example, for big purchase, right? I'm gonna buy a car, so you're not gonna say, oh, this car is red, I like it. You're probably gonna compare to, like, oh, what about like this model? How many kids do I have? If this is going to save me gas. So that's called central route. You're using your logic to do things, to make decisions. There's like peripheral routes, which basically means that you're buying something that probably you need every day. So instead of like making a very logical decisions, you're not going to say like, oh, I'm going to buy Coca-Cola over Pepsi because Coca-Cola have 1% more sugar. You're not going to think that. You're just like, oh, I noticed this on somewhere, or like I like this brand, but why do you like this brand? You don't know. And and that's like what exposure and impression normally work, is that they're trying to connect this brand or this image or this pattern to some piece of the emotion you might have through their advertisements, through their campaign. So for example, Monster, right? Like if they put like Monster on the shorts of like UFC fighters and keep doing it, you start to connect Monster with like someone who's very feisty, very energetic, very cool. And then the next time we're trying to get some energy drink, it's oh, Monster. And then you start to think about, oh, Conor McGregor, oh, I like it. I mean, depends on who you are, right? Some people might like someone who's more humble. But anyway, like you notice Monster, oh, I'm gonna get this one, right? That's how they basically help you to make decisions.
Got you. So that's like a perception play.
Yeah, that's a very
brand,
superficial explanation of this whole theory, but yeah, that's an example.
Got you. No, that's a. Thank you for explaining that. So, I think we were talking about cars specifically. And the way that you phrased it, like, blew my mind. But now my brain, it's been a while, and I can't necessarily get it. So let's say I'm the car. I'm the athlete or whatever, or I'm in need of an athlete, right? For like F1 or whatever. I want to sponsor a race or find a driver, whatever. I don't know the thing. And the reason let's do billboards. Let's do billboards because that is a little archaic and I don't understand the business practice. Because like with anything that's entertainment, you can kind of tie some numbers to it. It makes logical sense to me. But billboards, like, how do you sell? How many people are on that road? How many potential individuals might see that? And then how do you tie that back to conversion? Data makes everything easier where it's just like, this is how many people are on the site. This is how many you are, not converting. We're going to do X, Y, and Z to recapture and optimize your site to increase your conversions. Like I can do all the math there every day. But billboards, there's no recapturing. I don't know how many people are seeing that. Is that stuff made up? Are you essentially coming up with a narrative, a really good story to sell a idea that might work? It's kind of like an empty startup pitch. It just looks good and sounds good. Is it a scheme? Can you break that down for us?
So, I mean, by no means like I'm like an advertising expert, right? But I think
let's think through this. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like so actually, let me just share you a story, a very short one. Yeah. So I think it was like almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago. Like I have a friend who's working for like a tech company in the marketing team. So one day he came back because we lived together. We were like a roommate at that time. So he was like, "Hey, dude, our budget, like the budget for our apartment get cut in half for this year." I was like, why? Because the leaders don't believe billboards or any of the traditional marketing channels because they feel like you can't quantify the outcome. Like they only believe in digital forms because then you can calculate the click-through rates and such and such. So that's the story, right? Like even for a big tech company like that, they can't really make a very highly quantifiable argument for some of the more traditional channels. But on the other end, like still there's a huge companies sending mails, right? Those pamphlet within which probably we're just gonna dump it like before you even open it. They're gonna put things on billboards. Why? Because historically it worked. That's the first thing. Like you have some historical data to support the pattern that it's probably gonna work. That's the first thing. The second thing, those are actually quite cheap at this age, so it's not that expensive compared to some of the website impressions, which is like ridiculously expensive. So that's the second one. Like, why not, right? The third reason I think is also there's like some preventative strategy there as well, as if you don't do it, someone else will do it. can you afford the risk that someone else did it and they succeed, especially like thinking about your competitors, right? So maybe, right, like if it's not very costly, and also probably there's like a fourth reason is that there's a lot of so companies are not doing their advertising by themselves. They have like PR agencies, third-party agencies, and then as a total programmatic advertising package, I think it kind of contains some of the more traditional channels as suggestions. So you might as well just do it, and those are pretty cheap as well, right? I know like most of the companies probably going to spend most of the money on website impressions, Instagram, you know, TikTok, whatever.
Yeah.
But still, right? Like if it's cheap, why not? Right? Like someone might see it. Right, but as you can see, like less and less billboards are being used by bigger companies. Mostly are for local businesses. Like in New York, we have these two lawyer partners who's constantly asking you if you have a hip injury from your employers, you can call them. So I think like they're basically on like 50% of the billboards I've seen in New York City. Does that work? Well, I remembered it, right? So do I need them? Maybe not. But when my hip get injured by McKinsey for some reason, I'm probably going to call them so they can help me to win a lawsuit. So I think it's really just like the opportunity we talk about, that with this exposure you will have it, but without it you won't.
I see that now, and I didn't at all think about the cost of physical versus digital, and even with the like whatchamacallit, the if you don't do it, somebody else will, and there might be some opportunity costs. If you don't do that and it ends up working out really well, somebody has the possibility or the opportunity to take that entire market from you if they are the ones that are performing really well in there. Because I've been seeing like brands pile money into. Granted, I'm really into the metaverse, but I keep seeing mother suckers going into Roblox, man. I really can't wrap my mind around it. I'm just like, what?
And there's like this target audience as well, right? If your target audiences are like, for example, truck drivers, then billboards make a lot of sense because that's probably the channel they see the most, right? The same thing as like if your target audiences are farmers, then those pamphlets in mail actually make a lot of sense because that's their behavior pattern. So I think like, you know, who are the audience you have also, you know, plays a big role there.
Yeah, I agree, man. Well, I first off, I want to say thank you for like just breaking that down. Like that was just me selfishly in that example, because it's, you know, I understand the digital side of things, and I was like, well, if I knew how to calculate all aspects of that, like how many people are coming in, how many people are going out, how many people are we missing, how many people are we converting. It's really just a game of how can we, with the pool that we have, continue to recapture as much of the people who are currently coming to watch our stuff versus paying more money to acquire new customers, which is more costly because you have to build trust with them. There's a whole other funnel for that. And last question, it's going to be very short. What are your thoughts on just the metaverse in general? Have you been paying attention to that conversation? Have you not? Thoughts there? You're just like, nah, we're good with... It's Turkey Week, Brandon. Leave me alone.
I do, though, but I feel like... So I have, like, two very conflicted thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first one is, so I grown up as a big fan of Ghost in the Shell. I don't know if you heard about that. Like,
yeah.
So I dreamed of, you know, Metaverse, you know, like things. And I told my friends that if Elon Musk needs like a volunteer to put chips in his head, you know, I'm up for it.
Yes.
Right? Like, so that's one thing, right? I like it. But on the other hand, like, you know, I feel like Metaverse on the other side feels a little, you know, the word involution?
No.
So that's like a sociological term. Basically means that when a like so one like a what is it called, a community or like a society stop evolving to a higher form. They start to put all the resources into something to make the current progress more granular, more subtle, more detailed, without actually creating more value out of it. So what is metaverse, right? Is that a type of involution, right? Because right now I feel like when we're talking about metaverse, we're still saying, oh, it's going to create like a virtual society, a virtual world. It almost feel like digital twin. Like, so what, right? Like, I feel like that's the biggest question I want to know is like, so what? Because if that's really just like, sure, we can have a digital twin, and for some reason, like we put a lot of resources in people living a second life, but we're not really creating too much value out of it. That's a problem, right? Because then you're basically saying that instead of like exploring outwards, you're kind of like sealing people inside this sphere even more, right? So I feel like that's the two sides I'm kind of struggling. It's like I really appreciate it, I like it, but on the other hand, I'm a little worried about like what exactly it is. And also, I guess like one last thing is it's still very early. Like it's almost feel like mixed reality has been a concept for what 10 years already, and we still don't really have like a very clear revenue model or value chain around it. Like I'm pretty sure like metaverse is not gonna have like a full value chain for a while. So I'm pretty excited to wait and see.
I'm excited too, man. And the thing is that it's happening in many different ways that I can't even like catch up with, because there's weird things happening in the crypto. It's not necessarily metaverse, but it's business models. Have you heard of Helium? I'm sure you have. All right, Helium, let me blow. I know that. All right, people who are watching this at home later in the day, like, just catch up on this. I hope you watched for this long. So, dude, Helium. You're an Elon Musk fan. So imagine Starlink. You have to pay for the service. Takes a while. It's essentially a node-based system. Helium is node-based. You pay a one-time fee of $600. It is a miner. It mines through radio waves. And essentially, the people who are basically building Starlink, or essentially the Helium network, get paid to extend the network. And what's cool is you can actually go to their website and see where the nodes are, how much people are mining. And there's like neighbors of mine, there's 2 nodes by me, and they're like making anywhere between like $75 to $400 a month. And I'm just like, hold on. One-time fee, $600. 75, depending, I think because it is radio, I guess the person who's making like $400 a month, they have some elevation. But $75 a month being paid, that's someone's own internet 5G bill being paid to them for extending the network. And I was like, that is a business model that, let's say you really want to support, like, I'm not a vegan, but let's say you want to support like a vegan food delivery truck. What if, or any other system, what if there's, through the use of, or decentralized finance, whatever, that you are an owner and an investor in these systems, and by contributing, whether it's capital, whatever, etc., you're not only incentivized to do so, you also reap rewards from it. And essentially, I was like, everybody in my family's getting the Helium, or some sort of radio thing. I was like, that's free internet and free money for $600 down payment. And I was like, what else can you do this with? Because you were like, this is just the beginning. That is something basic in my understanding of something of use. But the use, I was just like, holy cow. And the fact that you could do that even with, like, I think NFTs are, when it comes to art, are a little, it's weird. It's just like art. But you're a smart dude, and you probably know more than me in regards to engineering. But like, if you're a rapper or any sort of artist, and you're like, yo, anybody who supports my course, my art, my whatever, if you guys buy into it, every purchase that happens in the future, you guys get a 20% return. Or you could even do, you figure out the type of returns that your community gets. I'm like, that is crazy. Anyway, but like that's just one small thing, and then I'm not sure if you're hip on there's the metaverse conversation and the Omniverse conversation with Nvidia. Have you been and by the way, man, I literally can talk about this shit on like all day. So you gotta like time me out. I'm gonna try to stick 5 more minutes and then we're good. But have you heard of Nvidia's Omniverse?
I heard a little bit. I think like it's kind of like another thing they use like for their GPU, right? Like just trying to, but I guess, but I heard like that one is closer to the mixed reality type of approach versus like Metaverse is like a total digital twin. Is that right?
Yeah, so it sounds a little bit more plausible. And what I understood better about it is, so they're using data that you would find in, so this is what really got me. So the presentation was talking about, well, when you have machines in physical world, you have to produce a lot of those to produce a lot of learning for, I guess, the network. And he was like, versus having like 100 or whatever, a lot of cost to produce these physical robots for the network learning, we could do billions of virtual learning for machines to produce neural net learning for the physical world. So I was like, that is some crazy stuff, because you can teach robots in a digital world to help produce physical assets.
Yep.
And I was like, that makes more sense. And I understand like the AR portion of it, that wasn't too impressive because I was just thinking Snapchat, but like having, I don't, that, my brain is like, but it's super crazy stuff, man. And I feel like almost behind the times because like I feel like I just got comfortable on the internet. I'm not sure if you feel the same way. And then you got people talking about, there's a whole bunch of different crypto coins. You have basically the internet's gold, Bitcoin, and then you have Ethereum, the silver, the electricity of the internet, and then you have Solana, and then different altcoins, projects on top of that stuff. Yeah. Anyways, disclaimer, this is not a investing channel. We don't know exactly what we're talking about. We're just excited individuals that know a little bit about the internet. But yeah, man, I appreciate you sharing this time with me, man, and going over the time to just nerd out a little bit. And for those folks at home, if you guys want to nerd out more with Lou, all of his links are down in the description, his LinkedIn as well. Yeah, man, do you have any last things to say to the audience?
Well, I guess first, thanks a lot for, the time, and also give me a chance to share some of my experience. And if I say any last words, I guess for me, one of the most interesting thing that kind of supporting me to just keep doing what I'm doing, and also thinking in a way that some people feel like is quite insightful, is just keep asking, so what, right? I feel like that's probably the biggest thing I learned from my rhetoric professors. There's always a so what, and if you miss that, then you're missing the true insights within this. So when we're talking about from chef to UX designer, I think it's the so what, or what exactly are we doing, why we're doing what we're doing. The same thing as when we're talking about design strategy, how can we connect the value? I think that's the so what, right? You designed this, so what? What exactly we're trying to achieve? Yeah. And to my thought on other stuff metaverse, I feel I'm always trying to think about so what, because I guess that kind of motivating me to think more independently and also be more flexible.
I'll dig it. I won't say I want to add anything to that. I think there's a beautiful end, and thank you guys so much for hanging out. And if you guys popped in midway, Do watch the entire thing. There's a lot of gems. And also, thank you guys so much for your patience, for all the technical difficulties. And thank you again, Lou. It's been a pleasure.
No
and
problem.
with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Lou will see you on the internet. Peace out. Bye.